I am so glad that you chose to spend an hour or so with me and to spend some time um, considering some of the ways that we can take care of ourselves as helpers and healers, whether those of you who are clinicians and those of you who are not clinicians. Just looking at some of the ways that we can help ourselves in the midst of, not only in the midst of what we're going through right now, but looking at the long haul, looking at that which um, we have at our disposal from the past, that which we are learning in the present, and taking the path of mindfulness in this phase of the journey in order so that perhaps we might see some shifts in ourselves and in others going forward. And so, when I was thinking about what webinar to present second, I presented on mindfulness, EMDR therapy, and telehealth, because that is a very important subject right now. And then I thought the book that I wrote in 2016, Clinical Dharma, contains, I think, some hints as to what might be helpful right now across the board. I think a lot of you who are working in this environment know that there are additional challenges that mindfulness practice can have a positive or healing impact on, both for us and our clients and the people that we help. So that's the reason why we're here doing this. And I'm not going to go through this step by step. I'm just going to bounce around and say that I know that there's some people here who do know me. There might be some who don't, but very quickly, I've been practicing Buddhist mindfulness for over 30 years now. And I lived at a Zen monastery for a year in upstate New York and meditated 4.5 hours on a regular day, 10 to 14 hours on a retreat day. Comes under the category, as I often say, of I did that so you don't have to. And also on the EMDR side, I'm presenting this year again after presenting for most of the last 4 years. I'm presenting on healing, the healing effects of EMDR, the role of spirituality in the healing effects of EMDR, and also the etiology of PTSD and just other trauma-related difficulties. And so this is also obviously something that's very close to my heart and something that I quite honestly desperately want to share with as many people as I can. And so today's talk is based on the book Clinical Dharma, which basically tracked the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path of the historical Buddha with any and all wisdom that is specific to that specifically impacts our work as healers and helpers, or gives us perspective and or sustenance in our work as healers and helpers. And then lastly, I'll just, the master's program I'm in right now in healthcare innovation at the University of Pennsylvania has enabled me to really continue to not only think through, but design and implement more ways of helping my fellow helpers with this information and these practices, and also my clients and hopefully your clients. So this is, a case where everyone globally is going through something together. Any sense of interconnectedness that wasn't there before certainly is there now. And so it really it threw me into re-looking at all this material and reframing it for myself to have it apply directly to the pandemic, but also what it means to be a healer and a helper in the big picture, and to have that be sustainable. That's very much what I noticed, and that propelled me into writing the book and teaching this over the last few years. So my hope, as always, when I was a high school teacher in Brooklyn, I was taught by my teacher mentor. She said, if you teach one thing to one person this year, you've done a good job. So my hope is that something today helps at least one of you as you go forward in the journey. And I also just want to say happy or good Pesach, happy Passover, and Good Friday. There's a lot of spiritual aspects to what we're going through, or people are applying their religion or their spirituality or their spirit to what's going on. So I appreciate you, second day of Passover and Good Friday, and all the implications of those holidays today. So I'm going to start. We're going to do 3 very brief meditations during this presentation. And so I'm going to ask that you get into a position, if you're not already, get into a posture that you can sustain literally for 2 minutes. That we're going to meditate for 2 minutes. And I'm going to give some gentle guidance. I'm going to bell us in and bell us out. And the purpose of doing these 3 meditations is, my hope is that these 3 particular practices, even at the length of 2 minutes, might become, if they aren't already, part of your toolkit as you go through your each and every day of being a healer or a helper. So this one is first foundation of mindfulness, which is the mindfulness of the body. And I'm going to ring a bell, and I'm going to give some instruction during the meditation. It's obviously going to be brief and simple. And then I will give some instruction before the bell, which is, please know that you don't have to close your eyes if you don't want to. Oftentimes in meditation sessions, people are instructed to close their eyes. Trauma-informed and trauma-focused, but trauma-informed meditation, mindfulness, calls for choice. And so first choice is you can keep your eyes open, and if you do, maybe just half shut, kind of 45-degree angle down. And also, you're also able to opt in and opt out of anything that I give instructions about, meaning that if you don't want to participate in this particular meditation, you have that absolute choice and right. And then also, if you would rather spend the 2 minutes in a practice that you choose, just treat my voice like another sound in the room. So those are the pre-instructions. And here we go. I'm going to ring the bell, and then I'll ring it once to go in and once to go out. And so sitting into your posture and noticing points of contact. If your back is against the chair, notice that. Notice the feeling in the seat, backs of the legs, feet on the floor. If you're sitting cross-legged on a cushion, noticing the intertwining of the legs, the ankles, the feet, and where legs, ankles, feet touch the ground. If you're lying down, notice all those points of contact. And noticing the arms against the body even. Noticing contact where the hands rest. And taking a moment to notice if one or more of these points of contact feels like or represents or senses into a sense of grounding, ground or grounding or groundedness. And this might be experienced as rest, place of rest, or it might be experienced as strength that you can lean into. And you may experience, well, I actually don't feel so grounded right now. And if that's the case, just notice that with as little judgment as possible. But if you do have that sense of ground, go ahead and lean into it. Let yourself have that. And you may notice thoughts coming and going, even at this early stage of the meditation. And in this practice, what you can do is just notice, oh, I've been pulled away from my object of meditation. That's all right. It's totally normal. I'm just going to gently bring myself back to the body. And sitting in this way for another 30 seconds or so. So, know that that meditation, literally, even at 2 minutes, is something that you can use at any time during your day. One of the things that um, uh, people are noticing, I've noticed this before, is that if you're doing telehealth, it actually takes a lot more out of you. There's a certain type of concentration. There's something about the way we're relating and how much we have to put of ourselves into finding a way to help people to have the experience of being with us. Um, and so stopping, taking breaks, utilizing simple body base. You can also utilize the breath for the same exact practice, just inside or outside the nostrils, or the rising and the falling of the belly or the chest, and using that as your object of meditation. So I'm going to continue on and move into the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And that is the structure of Clinical Dharma. And there's a second edition that I'm working on right now. I'm going to add some more of the teachings of the historical Buddha to the book in order to hopefully be yet still more helpful. But today, I'm just going to go through some of the material in the book and some of the general teachings that produced it, which is the 2,600-year-old teaching on suffering and the end of suffering. And so, again, if these teachings didn't feel pertinent a few weeks ago, I think this focus makes a whole lot of sense. So the first truth that the historical Buddha spoke of in the Four Noble Truths was the diagnosis. He used the medical model of the time in order to create the Four Noble Truths. He had tried teaching what he had learned over his 7 years of going and seeking all the teaching across India and seeing all the most profound teachers, and then getting to a place where they were like, hey, I got nothing left for you. And so when he sat under the Bodhi tree for 7 days and emerged with a realization, he had to find a way to describe it to people. And fortunately, I think, for the world, he described it with this diagnostic, was what he came up with, which is that life does have dukkha. And the translation of dukkha, many of you who've been with me before know, we talk about how the standard or the most common definition that people are aware of and use is suffering. And that the other one is unsatisfactoriness, right? And so most of our lives are spent in the uncomfortability of unsatisfactoriness. Like, I don't like this traffic. I don't like this food didn't come out the way I wanted it to at the restaurant. I don't like the sound of the alarm in the morning. All of these things are in the realm of suffering. They're just lower on the continuum. And then there's the suffering that compelled Buddha to go out and sort of sort things out and then relay it to other people, which is, old age, sickness, and death. And so now we're in this pandemic, and the truth of suffering, unsatisfactoriness, is less present for many people than is suffering. And what happens is that those of us who are healers and helpers are often brought into this field by our own realization. Whenever it happens, for some of us it happens as kids, for some of us it happens later, where we see, experience, feel the suffering, and we are able to, or something compels us to investigate it in order so that we might be able to help others with this suffering that we see, that we share. I haven't met too many people in the helping professions who come in for other reasons. They may develop other reasons, but for the most part, people come into these helping professions because they feel a moral imperative, you might call it, to heal. And so one way of looking at how we need to, or work with, how it is best to work with this truth of suffering as a healer, is to understand that suffering is just the beginning. Suffering is that which puts us in this direction, as the slide is talking about, gives us direction and purpose. But we also need to keep our sanity. So we can't just go, oh, there is suffering, and start to roll around in it with ourselves or with our clients or with those that we want to help. We need to gain deeper insight into it. And again, this was a teaching that applies to all human beings. And what I'm trying to work with here is specifically kind of putting a little laser focus on the impact on us as people who are going out of our way to spend perhaps a majority of our time in helping people with their suffering. So our successful maintenance in this life as a helper depends upon us going past this initial starting point of, oh yeah, there's suffering. Many of you, I saw, I did the gala review at the beginning of while we were waiting, and I saw a couple of folks who I know practice in this way, with this investigating suffering with a spirit of curiosity. And that is something that I know for myself, that my instinct is to go, oh, life is suffering. I'm going to turn over in the bed and go back to sleep, either literally or figuratively. And so this conception of how to live and how to help is the opposite. It's wake up, wakey, wakey time. I'm going to get up. I'm going to get out of bed, and I'm going to proceed with a number of things, including understanding this truth of suffering. Now, the second truth is that the cause of suffering is not the pain of life. It's not the pandemic. It's not any of these things. It's craving, clinging, and attachment, and unhealthy attachment. I can't get into that whole, the fact that that word has a different meaning for us in a lot of the work that we do. But here we're talking about unhealthy attachment, or attachment to results, or attachment, unhealthy attachment to people, right? So the cause of suffering is craving, that I want things to be the way I want them. And then clinging, if they are the way I want them, clinging on to that. And then also aversion, not on this slide, but I don't want what I don't want. And in essence, what Buddha was doing here was, without brain scans and all the rest of it, intuiting the action of the reptile mind and the limbic brain that we have, along with our more insightful neocortex, and those actions of the brain that make us distinctively human. And so the cause, the diagnosis is there is suffering, and the cause is this craving, clinging, and attachment. And what I found, and again, this is just a thumbnail of what I talk about in the book, but the main cause of suffering I have seen, or a main cause, is the craving for a positive result, or an aversion to a negative result, and an attachment to the result regardless. Meaning that in our helping and healing work, the more I am able to let go of all that, the attachment to the result, that is where, and sometimes it feels counterintuitive. And sometimes, especially if we're only at the beginning of the journey and don't have a longer term understanding of what that might look like, it might look like a coldness. It might look like, the opposite of compassion to some. But in fact, the craving and clinging and aversion that the helper experiences in the helping work, a lot of it is right here in this place. So this crossroads, like this is where the practice happens. Again, there's more to it, but this is one of the, I won't call it a binary, I'll just call it a crossroads, as to whether I will be able to sustainably help people by not getting caught in the web of the craving, the clinging, and the aversion around the result. The third truth is that suffering can end. And in other words, there's a cure. It's a medical model here. And what is that cure? That cure is not ending the pain of the world. The world is going to continue to do the world. The cure is in ending or transforming. That's another thing is, the language, the ancient language talks a lot about ending. And then, and I think there's language of transformation too. And then in modern times, updates or either translations or interpretations, you can see more of that language of suffering can be transformed. And I think a lot of us who are healers and helpers, particularly clinicians, can identify with that and see that, in the work that we do. I know that I see that in my work with EMDR therapy because of the nature, what reprocessing actually is, transformation. And so in relation to what I was talking about a moment ago, if I'm able to apply loving detachment in our helping relationships, and again, not detachment like, not detached with an axe, as they say, but rather a detachment that allows for a compassionate touch while providing boundaries that respect both self and other. I find that when I put that at the center of my frame, that if that's the thing that I'm most focused on, then I end up helping and I end up sustained. I end up not drained and no longer able to help that person or others. And then the fourth truth was the prescription, the Eightfold Path. And so the Eightfold Path was laid out for us to be able to live mindfully and skillfully. And for the helper in particular, this focus on mindfulness of our inner experience and our relational presence in this healing or helping posture gives us a better chance to connect. And the beauty of this too is it's more expansive than just me and you. It's benefit not just to myself and to the person that I'm helping, but it's expansive and it can be for the benefit of all beings. When I have that frame and I have that energy, that energetic idea, belief, actuality of my taking the, call it the bodhisattva stance. Bodhisattva is like a pre-Buddha who just have the bodhisattva vow to heal the suffering of others, of all beings. And so when I come to my engagements in that way, I think that's what's happening. We can see that through, our individual work is often also community work, is also often global work. So I'm going to go through the Eightfold Path now. So the Four Noble Truths are the diagnostic, and it includes the Eightfold Path, which is the fourth truth of the historical Buddha. And so the first factor in the path, which, by the way, is not wholly linear, but it definitely makes sense in a linear fashion, but it's kind of more of a circle or a wheel. But wisdom or wise understanding is the first, right? One might think I've got to do a whole lot of other things in order to get some wisdom. But in this case, the wisdom is the first factor because, and those of you who are familiar with or are in or work with people in 12-step recovery know that in order to do the rest of the work that people need to latch onto or work the first step, because if they don't, then they won't possibly then believe that there's any reason to do the rest of the stuff. In other words, we need just enough wisdom to know that beginning this practice that we're talking about and this path would be a good idea. And so as we go forward with the practice, if we don't find ourselves unstuck, if we don't find ourselves open to the idea that there might be a different way of seeing, a different way of experiencing reality, a different way of treating clients, then we'll remain stuck possibly in the suffering because we'll still be in the craving and the clinging. So the wisdom that I received early in my helper career, my first helper job, vocation was educator. So the first lesson that I got was that it would be a good idea for me to see if applying this information would help me in my work, and it did. And then here's the big one. So these are the first two factors are called the wisdom factors. The second factor is wise intention. And the fact is that we're setting intention over and over and over again. Macro intentions, I intend to do my day's work today. I intend to meet my quarter goals for the quarter, or whatever it is. But there's the micro intentions. Like right now, you are setting intention over and over and over again to stay in this webinar. You are setting intention over and over again to apply the insightful mind and your body and your being into the material. You're setting your intention, moment to moment to moment. I am setting my intention moment to moment to moment. And so intention fed by this wisdom, as opposed to intention fed by delusion. I often use the addiction metaphor or analogy, where I'm 30 years in recovery, 31 years in recovery, and when I was using substances, I would set the intention to go to the bar. I'd set the intention to, find the dealer, whatever it is. And now I have a different wisdom. I now do the things that I do to take care of myself. So in this conception, Clinical Dharma, once I've set this intention to help, I can use this guidance to set wise intention at any time. Like I can notice that the fact is that I'm setting intention all the time. So I can notice it moment to moment, hour to hour, day to day, and as far as you want to take it. And so, since we're in the helping professions, this was the beauty of what I found to be, a great intersection between Buddhist psychology and the work that we do, is that because we've chosen the helping professions, that intention will almost always have the undercurrent and foundation of service, just naturally. Like we're ahead of the game. People in other professions may or may not have that as the sort of foundational element. We have a leg up, so to speak. I'm going to lead you through a 1 minute setting of intention. You can adjust your posture, you can stay where you are. That's another thought, is mindfulness practice doesn't always mean that we need to go into some big preparatory ritual. It's nice to have them. I have my altar, I use my bells, I do what I do. And then sometimes I just like pop into call it a mindful state. So I'm going to ring this bell, and I'm going to ask you to just take my 1 minute of instruction as you, and then of course you can opt out. So again, just 1 minute. So noticing either your body or your breath. If you're noticing the physical sensation of your breath, notice how it requires no setting of intention. It is a place that takes care of itself. Notice the sense of intention that you had when you received the information on this webinar, and the intention that you set to be here. Notice the energy of the intention that you set as you logged on and waited for it to begin. Notice the power of the intention that you set when I rang the bell a moment ago. And notice the power of your intention fed by these previous intentions to listen, absorb, contemplate the remainder of our session together. And at the sound of the bell, if your body tells you to adjust or to whatever your body tells you to do, allow for that. I won't be able to have a conversation with you all right now. I can have it offline or some other time about any impact at all that 1 minute meditation may or may not have had. What I ask you to consider, though, is to engage with the possibility you could do that for longer, is going back and noticing the intentions that you set to become a healer or helper, or any other thread that you want to garner, build, increase the energy of, and do that type of finding the intentions that were set even years ago, and then bringing yourself to the present and even the future. And you can do that in order to reset. You know, at times like this where things are very tense for everyone, being able to do a reset as often and wherever and whenever you need to. So then there's the action factors. I'm sorry, not the action factors, but the ethical factors. Sorry, I jumped ahead. So the ethical factors are a big part of why I wrote Clinical Dharma and teach the way that I teach, is that Buddhist psychology and mindfulness are, very intertwined, and clinical mindfulness, as it's been practiced over the years, in many ways has kind of extracted the ethical element. And when I say that, it's not so much that people are running around and unethically using mindfulness, but it's more that it's part of the package. And meaning less about like, are you ethical or are you not even, but more, what are you doing with it, or how is it impacting your daily life, and or how is your daily life impacting your mindfulness? And so these three ethical factors are about the ways that we move in the world and have a lot to do with our work as helpers. So what does wise or right speech look like as a helper? And so in order to provide the best care, I need to use words that reflect my deepest intention to meet clients where they are, not force them to meet me where I am or where I think they should be. And so the power of speech, right? I mean, even though people say that it's not the most effective form of communication, but it is the most effective communication, or it's the most common form of communication. So then I need to be, as a helper, especially careful about what words I use. And it's part of why I love EMDR therapy so much, because we're not using our words perhaps as much as other therapeutic modalities, other than saying, go with that, and what are you noticing now? And it's also at the center of this is, how do I be client or helpee centered in my work? And so the words I want to find are to find that relational bond, but even more importantly, providing a context for that client to do the healing that they inherently are able to know how to do. We use the analogy of the physical wound, physical trauma, and how emotional and psychological and spiritual trauma are the same, in as much as the person who's suffering is actually the expert on that person, and that their body, brain, soul, spirit knows how to heal itself. And that I want to use words and actions, but words that will provide the space and the ability for them to enact that experience. And so speech, the reason why or one of the reasons that I posit that speech comes before action in the linear presentation of the factors, is that it includes internal speech. Like, a big part of the intention setting process, whether it's a day of thinking or a split second, is that intention is often kind of fed, set, created through words and internal speech. And so my working on my own internal speech really can be extremely helpful in making sure that my speech is wise and helpful. Action is everything else we did other than the words. And so in mindfulness, action and the mental emotional act of self-reflection become more intertwined. In other words, my own mindfulness and the action that I'm taking, and similarly with the client, because a lot of what is implied here is that I am building my own mindfulness as I am also trying to help the client or that person who I'm helping to also develop their mindfulness, so that each of our own self-reflections and other reflections become more of a, call it a team effort. And then last piece there is actions and speech that are heavily considered prior do a lot better than impulsive. And that's a huge issue right now in the midst of this pandemic, is that a lot of what is natural instinct is to react as opposed to respond. And so I have found a lot of solace. I've been reaching out to people who've been thinking these things through for a long time and acting as if we're not kind of always in a pandemic, but always in a thread of easing suffering for ourselves and others. And so the actions are more well considered, and there's more healing available that way. And then the thing that brings us all together, and actually the thing that propelled me into thinking of Dharma in the clinical sense, is wise livelihood. And the goal of wise livelihood is to be of help and not do harm. So we're in that flow. You know, in the ancient times, you know, he was like, don't sell poison. There were, you know, a few other livelihoods that were harmful. And so ours not only is just in theory designed to not be harmful, but a lot of what it is that brings us to this livelihood, if you are a professional helper, is I want to help. I want to not do harm. And so when I contextualize this in the midst of the four truths and the rest of the factors, that gives me a lot of support for this goal. And so my guiding principle is that all beings are able to become free from fear, healthy and happy and at ease. These last three factors are specific to mindfulness and concentration. And so making the effort to go ahead and live and work mindfully. So I'm going to put the correct energy and practice into my mindfulness and concentration at any given time, which includes those of you who've seen my other presentations on effort. It's the opposite of this ant doing its work. It's a dog lying on its back, I think. So sometimes that's the effort. So wise effort means, am I pushing, am I pulling, or am I, you know, resting? Am I replenishing? Right? So there's no perfect science to this, but again, what we're working with here is a framework that gives us a better chance of getting this done. And so I talk about this a little bit more in the book, and it would really be a subject for, you know, for a work, let's say a lot of these subjects are webinars of their own. But Buddhist psychology talks about the effort to avoid, like making that effort to abstain from substances when I'm dealing with addiction. Like that's the sort of first effort that I make, perhaps if I'm working with an abstinence-based model. Effort to eliminate that which doesn't work, the sort of delusory thinking and the delusory actions. And then the multitude of efforts to lead a more skillful life, like taking proactive action to enact my mindfulness, enact my concentration in order to be of no harm or less harm to myself and others. And then the last two factors are mindfulness and concentration. And again, this was in some ways Buddhist psychology's special sauce, in as much as a lot of meditation up until that time, and a lot of meditation since, has been about sort of not necessarily escape in a sense, but this this modality, this way of being involves turning towards the pain, turning towards the suffering, turning towards the difficulty, turning towards that which so much of our brain and body and being wants to turn away from, with good reason, right? No one likes pain. No one wants to feel it. And so in the clinical Dharma sense, it's, you know, similar to other definitions of mindfulness that you've heard, the cultivation of non-judgmental awareness infused with acceptance of what is. Right now, it's like this. And so rather than trying to disconnect from painful states and difficulties, we cultivate a mindfulness of all of it, every aspect of life. And this has been a theme. I've been doing a daily meditation with a little group throughout this situation. And that's kind of the connecting theme, is that, uh, there's painful states and difficulties abound. There's just everywhere, every day. Every day is different, but still, we're all dealing with some very difficult stuff. And so it really behooves me to absolutely, like I do, I love to disconnect in different ways. I also like to lean into it and then find the joy or other aspect of it. I guess like the difference between my watching a lot of bad TV or sitting down at my drum kit in the other room and playing some music. I actually just started my new mindfulness and concentration practice. Is I broke out the books that I used when I was 8 years old to do this, and I'm doing that. Right? Like that to me, that's a mindfulness practice. And then if I were to watch all 6 seasons or however many there were of Breaking Bad again, that's fine too. Right? But in the end, the core of my wise mindfulness is around those practices and ways of being that help me to deepen that. And then, I'm sorry, I went too fast there. Wise concentration. So the things that I've asked you to do so far, like notice, and the things that we ask our clients to do if we're EMDR therapists or any other type of helper, like learning how to refocus the mind, stop swinging from branch to branch of the monkey mind, and learning as many different ways that help us to develop this concentration, because that's kind of what allows for the mindfulness, the more non-judgmental awareness of the big picture to happen, is through these concentration practices. And we can do it anywhere, anytime. And so, just want to summarize before allowing for a little bit of time for questions. And one last meditation. So right now, we are doing what we have to do to support ourselves and our communities to get through this. And the world is going through collective trauma. And so we've been called up, we've been asked, whether we like it or not, to show up in this way and to show up compassionately, mindfully, intelligently, so that we can not only prevent symptoms, right? Because a lot of the Johnny on the spot work we do makes it so that not everyone gets PTSD or other difficulties. But we can also then treat the symptoms that are going to arise. We're going to be busy people for a while. But we also might bring about new modalities of healing, innovative, effective ways of relating to each other. So that's not a silver lining statement. That's just a statement, because I see it happening already. And so if we can all support each other in that spirit of meeting that goal, not just of surviving, but coming up with new tools or new ways of thriving. So keep calm and lean into the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, if you choose, or your equivalent construct that gives you the ability to do what I've been describing. So I'm going to close with one last brief meditation. I'm not going to ring a bell this time. I'm just going to state the phrases of loving kindness twice through, once towards ourselves and once out towards all other beings. First, towards ourselves. May I be free from fear. May I be healthy or healed. May I be happy. May I be at ease. and now to all beings everywhere. May you be free from fear. May you be healthy or healed. May you be happy. May you be at ease. I want to thank you all for your attention, and I'm going to hand it over to Roshni to pick up the questions off the chat, I think is the way we're going to do it. And I'm going to hit you with that screen. Just so you know, I, like many of us, have not turned into a pumpkin, but rather I'm working out of the home office. So reaching out, those of you who have my phone number and like to text, know that that kind of stuff often just falls out of my brain, and that email there or any of my emails is the best way to find me, and you can ask me anything you like, micro or macro, business or personal. You know, I'm here to do what I can to support my healer and helper community as we go through this together. So I hope anything or everything that I presented today is of at least a little help. And so let me know if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you all for being here. If you have to leave right away, I did put a link to both the presentation and also the recording of today will be there as well, and information if you need to contact us. And we do have a question from Rue Griffith. So as we develop this practice, how do we sit with the humanity of it, but still show up with clients in a way they need? So for example, noticing that I feel sorrow and grief, and then shifting it to something helpful for that next client I have to see. Maintaining
Oh, go ahead, finish. I'm sorry.
Maintaining that disconnected compassion as we are new to the practice. So I'm also put this in your chat, Steve.
That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it because, you know, again, I was I constricted myself to an hour or so because I'm respectful of the fact that a lot of us have a lot to do. And that was one of the points that I really wanted to be clear on, is that whether you're at the beginning of your practice or you're in the middle or like 30 years in, there's a very, it can be very intense, being that we too are going through this grief and sadness and our own suffering that is a shared suffering and profound and possibly plugging into anything and everything else that's going on with us. You know, I'm definitely one of those people that, you know, comes under the category of the wounded healer. And so couple things. One is I personally have stepped up my overall self-care in order so that I am better able to hold my own sadness, grief, any other difficulties that are happening here, and have them not like squashed or into the therapeutic relationship. That was a clinical term. And so that you use the word disconnected. I don't know if that was the word that you used or if Roshni picked that up, but detached and disconnected are different, right? So the key here is like I am me. I'm a human being, right? I am sad. I have grief. I have joy. I have this. I have that. And we've always been taught to bring ourselves into the therapeutic engagement, right? But how do you do that without it becoming about me and my thing? Is most of the tools and the modes and the suggestions that are in this presentation and in between sessions or before the day starts and when the day ends, doing whatever it is I need to do to further do my own healing. Because I was going to use the word contain, but I don't want to, it's not a containment that is about disconnecting. It's a containment that's about what we were trained to do in school, right? The containment of, what is my job? I'm a human being. I'm a professional human being who sits with people and provides them with tissues when necessary, right? And so how do I take care of myself in between sessions so that when I'm in session and what is essentially really countertransference comes up, how am I handling it under these extreme conditions? And I found that the way to handle it has been through developing offline or in the in-between times and before times and after times, my mindfulness practice, which allows me to sort of hold everything that's in the room, my own stuff, their stuff. And then when the session's over, I'll give you one last example because it's just a more of a visual thing. So when I was living at the monastery, you would have these meetings with the Zen teacher, and there was all this ritual around it. It was in the middle of a sitting. They'd ring a big bell, like the biggest bell they had, and you'd run, literally. It didn't look very Zen. People are just running, kind of elbowing each other, trying to get to the front of the line, because the concept is, I want to be enlightened first. Anyway, you get there and you're waiting your turn, then you ring a bell to tell the teacher you're on your way, and you go in. And I just remembered, I got to experience this over a year, where I would come in and the way he did it was his eyes were closed. And he had just seen somebody else with their biggest spiritual problem / dilemma, trying to answer the big questions of life, was there, like, I don't know, 30 seconds ago. And the eyes would be closed, and I had this sense like he was just hanging out, like doing his thing. And then you do this bowing, and I would get up and his eyes would be open, and I literally felt like the only person on earth. Like, I don't know what was going on internally for him when he would, do that. But I guess in a sense, I've tried to find out what that is over time with my own mindfulness practice. And so I'd be the only person that there is, right? And then we would finish the engagement. He would ring a bell to end it. And then I would bow. And when I would come back up, I watched his eyes literally just drop. And I realized before I left the room, he was already, sort of, he had done what he had done. He was still holding the space, But so I'm trying to do that myself all the time. And so if you're new to the practice, just start to notice more, be more mindful of how you do feel in the room, how you do feel after a session, how you do feel at the beginning of a workday and the end of a workday, and then make any adjustments or increase or change the nature of practice in order to help continue to cultivate that. So I hope that answered the question. It was a lot of words and it went in a couple of different directions.
Thank you, Steve. We have one more question. Can you talk about how and when you psychoeducate clients about the Four Noble Truths?
Great question. So, and the answer to that is similar to the answer to how I psychoeducate around EMDR therapy or trauma therapy in general, right? So sometimes a client will come in, and what I do is I kind of, amongst everything else that I'm assessing for, do they have a mindfulness practice of some kind? And when I say that, I don't mean like if it's Buddhist mindfulness or not, but like, do they have some kind of mindfulness practice? Do they have any sort of idea or inclination to know about Buddhist psychology or clinical mindfulness or any of that? And then same with EMDR therapy, like those of you who know me know that I'm an EMDR therapist, period, end of sentence. And so when someone comes to my office, I consider them to be in the first one or two phases of EMDR. And part of that is psychoeducation around EMDR. And there are clients who come in, I don't say a word about EMDR for more than one session, multiple sessions. I'm still doing the process of getting them ready, building the rapport, all that. But if I have a sense that they're not ready to hear that, or it's not the right conversation to have, or whatever it is, whatever it is that's going to help them to land in the therapy. So it's the same with the Four Noble Truths. A lot of what happens is they're open to mindfulness, or they have some practice that resembles it, and I ask them a little bit more about how does that help you. I try to get a sense of how does that increase their mindfulness and their concentration. And generally what I do is, no matter what practice a person does or doesn't have, I don't start with the Four Noble Truths. I go with giving them, ask them to do 5 minutes a day of just, breath and or body practice, like counting their breaths or noticing body sensations, something simple that matches what it is that I'm seeing clinically. And if they can't do 5 minutes, I say, let's do 1 minute, right? And I start to talk to them about, at that point, about how 5 minutes a day is better than 30 minutes on Saturday and none the rest of the week. So it's just, in a sense, that's their introduction to the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, is the mindfulness aspect and getting into the moment. And then it becomes about starting to psychoeducate them about, why would we want to be in the moment? Well, the past is gone and the future is not here yet. And so it's just future tripping or regret or whatever, however it's manifesting. And so it's more along those more general lines. And then at a certain point, if it becomes your sort of orientation to like bring the Buddhist psychology to bear in a very clear way, then that's around the time. And I guess I'm talking about a client who doesn't have that much knowledge about it. And I try to tie it to the diagnostic. I tie it to the diagnostic. I tie it to how trauma therapy and Buddhist psychology really track each other, and that the fact that life is suffering and that the cause of suffering is an overactive amygdala and basal ganglia, whatever the language is of maybe the more scientific side, because that is part of what attracts me and attracts many others to Buddhist psychology, regardless of any other spiritual practice or affiliation, is the fact that obviously it was a spiritual world and a spiritual practice, a spiritual design, and it's also scientific, or rational. And so, noting that historical Buddha intuited what we now know about the triune brain and how it operates, and how our craving and clinging and aversion is not because we're stupid or awful. It's because we're human beings with survival instinct, right? So that's kind of how it goes. If someone comes to me kind of like they already have a practice, or we just jump in and start making those connections. I have a client like that right now, where that's the framework that they were, oh, I get it. Oh, that's connected to that. Let's do that. And then with people who are less versed in it, I do start more with, are you open to adding mindfulness practice to this? Because in EMDR therapy in particular, it will help you to dial things down and to be able to self-soothe, and it'll make you a better reprocessor. When we get to the reprocessing stage, basically reprocessing is a mindfulness practice. That's the webinar in 10 minutes from now. So thank you for those two questions. Is there anything else, Roshni?
I think that's all we have time for today. No other questions. If anyone has any other questions, as I mentioned, the contact information is coming at you again. Thank you so much for being here, and reach out if there's any way we can support you. May you be well. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here.